Hello everyone, Andrew Martin here, and welcome to the British Chess Magazine Game of the Month for January 2012. I hope you have a happy new year and that 2012 goes very well for you. My game this month comes from the FIDE World Cup, which was played in 2011 between Gashimov, graded 2760, and Sergei Azarov, graded 2648. And it's a very interesting example of an opening variation which has come very much back into vogue recently against the Ruy Lopez, and that is the Schliemann variation with f5. Now this line, this very sharp line, goes in and out of fashion, and it's Timur Radjabov who has reinvigorated the Schliemann with some interesting new ideas and some bold play with black in recent times. So naturally, when somebody of the calibre of Radjabov is using the Schliemann, and Ivanchuk too has used it recently in a notable game against Vichy Anand from Sao Paulo in 2011, then a lot of players tend to become interested. We're going to see in this game an interesting new treatment by White, which, if it doesn't call the Schliemann into question, certainly poses black some new problems. And in this encounter, Gashimov just played a very quiet move here, d3, to a certain extent ducking the theoretical issue. White settles for a quiet position where he can try to claim a positional edge. Of course, the main line with knight c3 is much sharper, but there are practical reasons why I might not play this move. Firstly, there are many difficult and sharp variations that black can play after knight c3, and you have to remember everything. And recently at the highest level, the line with f takes e4, knight takes e4, knight f6 has turned out to be a tough nut to crack. Now, I do have some ideas against this line, so let's take a little look at a fragment of a game between Bologan and Zvigintsev, played in Rogaška Slatina 2011, to try to figure out how White might meet this Tartakova variation. Well, Bologan in this game took on f6 check, and then he played queen to e2. And I think this is the critical line. White wins a pawn by force in this line, and it is up to black to demonstrate compensation. And the way White wins a pawn is simply after bishop e7 to take the knight, and then take on e5. And now black is supposed to play queen e6 in this position. It's hard at first sight to believe that black has enough compensation for the pawn, but there are lots of strong players who are happy to defend the black cause in this position, and black has activity, two bishops and the open f-file to claim some compensation with. Nevertheless, Bologan in this game played a pretty good move. He played the straightforward move d4, and now Zvigintsev played a5. And the point of that is clear. Black is thinking about activating his bishop via a6. He's also possibly going to prod the white queen side by using his pawn there as a kind of battering ram. Well, Bologan was unimpressed in this game. He played knight d3. Black took on e2 check. With the queens off, obviously White is happier. Black played a4, and now White played bishop e3. And actually, as the game goes, in my opinion, black fails to work up enough compensation for the pawn. Bologan played f3, black played king d7, g4, bishop e6, knight f4. It's clear to me that in this position, White has negotiated the opening complications, and black is really struggling to claim enough compensation. Zvigintsev played bishop f7, White went h4, rook h f8. Obviously there are some issues there with the white kingside pawns. Nevertheless, Bologan pressed on. b3, bishop comes back to a6, and now after rook h3, bishop b7 and rook f1, I think White was solidly better. So just some sort of study of this game might furnish you with a weapon against this Tartakova variation, f takes e4, knight takes e4 and knight f6. But of course there's a lot more to black's position after f5 knight c3 than that. Never mind, in this game White played pawn up to d3, which is the quiet move. Black took on e4, knight f6, and now an interesting moment as Gashimov plays a very interesting and little played move here, bishop to e3. Very unusual move. White speeds ahead with development, and of course bishop e3 has the important function of preventing black from playing bishop c5, which of course, if we just drop back after the much more common castles, black usually does. So bishop e3, okay, well this is an interesting move. And now Azarov played bishop to b4 check. Now I'm not sure I like this move very much, but it's possible that black has been surprised by white's move. Now if we just drop back, it's clearly critical as to what happens after knight takes e4. And then there are a couple of variations. If black rises to the challenge and takes this pawn, white can castle in this position. Now black plays bishop e7, something like bishop c4. I mean, without a move like this, white's not going to be able to claim any compensation. Well, how is the white position here? Is it worth a pawn after knight f6, knight c3? Subsequent white players might have to come this way. Is there enough compensation here for white? For instance, if black plays knight a5, nudging the bishop off the diagonal. Very unclear. Obviously white can take on e5 in this position, then we take on c4, we castle. Suddenly black has two bishops, material qualities being to re-establish, but I don't think black's worse in a position like this. After knight takes e4, it's clear that white has to sack a pawn, so maybe a better way to do this is knight bd2, just speeding ahead with development. And if black doesn't want to lose any time here, he's probably got to take. Queen takes, queen f6, and now white can castle on either side. I quite like castling on the queen side here with obvious compensation. I mean, maybe after knight takes e4, this is the absolutely most logical continuation. And I think white has definite compensation here for the pawn. Well, maybe Azarov didn't like that, going back to the game now. And he played bishop b4 check. Of course, white blocked with a pawn. Black went bishop e7. So black's arguing he's blocked the c3 square, white can't play knight c3 anymore. But white regained his pawn with bishop takes c6 and then knight takes e5. And the point of this is that if black plays knight takes e4 here, we can go queen g4 with a sudden and rather deadly double attack on black's knight and pawn at g7. So Azarov, going back to the game, played bishop a6. White went knight d2. Black played rook b8. Queen comes out to a4, attacking the bishop. Black defended his bishop. Now white castled on the queen side. So black is still a pawn down. White's development is speeding along, and well, playing these positions is very much a question of taste. I quite like white's position. It seems to be without weakness to me, although black's two bishops have always got to be respected. Well, Gashimov now played a rather sober move, bishop to g5. But when running this game through Deep Rivka, bishop takes a7 was recommended by the computer program. And apparently this refutes black's play. And the point of it is that if black plays rook a8 in this position, we just go queen b3 check and should be able to emerge 2 pawns up from the complications. Going back to bishop a7, if black plays rook b5 in this position, then the computer wants to play knight d3 and says that once again black has no compensation. So it could well be that black is being very severely challenged by the way white has played in this game, and maybe bishop g5 wasn't the best move. Anyway, Azarov played his king into the corner, and now white blanked out the light square bishop by playing c4. c5 was played by black, trying to reintroduce the bishop into the game, and now pawn came up to h4. Rook b6, h5, setting up ideas of knight g6 check perhaps. Black went d6, and now Gashimov went through with this move anyway, claiming that it's very difficult for black, once he takes that knight, takes, to organise his defence. The pawn on d6 is interrupting communication between the two halves of the black position, and after king g8, queen a3, black had some serious issues, as white was threatening just simply to transfer his queen to the king side, and of course checkmate on h8. Well, Azarov now is, I think, in trouble. He tried queen g4, hitting the bishop on g5 and cutting down on the activity of white's queen. Just going back, can he do anything else? Well, if he tries queen e6, white executes his main idea with simply rook h4, rook c8, and now, of course, white can double up on the h file if he wants, but queen f3 might be stronger still, and that just simply threatens mate with rook h1 and rook h8. And of course, if black runs with king f8, he can't then put his knight in the way because the queen's pinning the knight. So I think white's just winning this position. Going back to queen a3, black can play queen e8 here, trying to get rid of the pawn. Then I think rook h8 check is looking interesting. Takes queen h3 check, king to g8, queen e6 check. Well, of course, black's got to put his rook in the way now. Then we take on f6. This is a rather curious idea to pin the bishop on e7. Of course, if black takes with the g pawn here, then he's all fouled up after rook h1. So rook b8 is possibly the only move. Then we take on e7. We go back with queen h3. Queen d7 making room for the king. Now it's time to take on f7. Rook h1. This may have seemed like a complicated variation, but the motive of mating with that pawn on g6 is a fairly straightforward one to understand. Going back to the position after queen e8, there might be an even simpler move here in bishop takes f6. And if bishop takes f6, we go check, and then queen h3 check, with mate on h7 to follow. So Azarov's chances are limited here. He tried queen g4, f4. Despite the fact white's a clear piece down here, he can take it slowly. Such is the strength of that pawn on g6. Rook fb8, doubling up. Rook h4, that was always going to be a problem for black. Rook dh1, king f8 only move, vacating the g8 square for a knight. And now pawn to f5. I'm afraid, from black's perspective, finishes the job. There's no defence to white's coming mating attack. The Schliemann has suddenly become serious Lopez currency. Now, you can choose the way that Gashimov played here, which is novel, or you can apply my suggestion after knight c3, f takes e4, knight takes e4, knight f6, the way that Bologan played in that fragment that we saw. But please be aware that if you go knight c3, you have to deal with many other variations. It's not just a simple case of dealing with this line of f takes e4. So I hope you enjoyed that, and if you're contemplating playing the Schliemann, a lot of strong players are coming this way, but it still seems to me to be a risky process.